Bang! Needs Knives. I'm Jared, and today we're just going to do a quick knife talk about bite from your edge. I just recently did a little short on it, but I'm going to get a little bit more in depth. So, bite from the edge. Basically, it's talking about how much bite does your edge have after sharpening or just period. Now, different steels take different kinds of edges, and different steels take more bite at different grits. There's also different angles that can increase your bite, like lowering your angle. The lower the angle, the more you can increase the bite. The heat treat of the steel can also be a factor. There's a lot of variables, but your goal, usually, when sharpening your knife, I mean, assuming it's not a straight razor and you're shaving with it, but assuming that it is an EDC knife or some sort of, utility knife or a knife you're going to use for work, your goal is to get the most amount of bite you can out of your edge, usually. Now, just to kind of show, I'll pull up a couple knives, just to kind of show differences in bite. Now, some people think that a polished edge doesn't have any bite. Well, that's not true. A lot of steels take great polished edges with a lot of bite. It just depends on the steel. Certain steels, yes, certain steels don't take a lot of bite with a polish, or they lose the bite the higher you go in grit. And to kind of counteract it, you can lower the angle more, but they just don't take a good polish. Now, this is basically what bite is, and this is what I showed in the short. I'm going to take this knife, the CIVIVI CHEVALIER. I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's spelled Chevalier or something like that. Anyways, so I'm going to take the weight of the knife, put the edge on this material, and I'm going to drag it. Okay, just the weight with my two fingers, just letting it, balance right on the material. And you'll see it's not biting into the material. Even when I drag it back and forth, it just doesn't bite into the material. Now, if I take another knife, the TRM Shadow, you'll see this one does. And I'll do the same thing. I'm just going to let the weight of the knife rest on the surface and pull back. And you'll see it is biting into the material. Now, this is a coarser edge, but even this edge with a polish can also bite into the material just fine. This has quite a bit of bite. It has a lot of bite. It's 20 CV, and it's not even a low angle. This 20 CV was done pretty well, so it has a good amount of bite. And I have resharpened it. Now, the knife itself and the price of the knife, or things like that, isn't really a factor. It's the type of edge you put on it and how you take the burr off and things like that. Now, like I said, certain steels take certain steels take high amounts of bite at different grits better. For an example, CPM 154 is a steel, in my opinion. I personally am not a huge fan of it because I like sharpening and I like a lot of bite at my edge. And CPM 154 does not take a lot of bite at the edge without it having an extremely low angle and it being more of a lower grit. At high grits, it gets really slick. Polished edge, forget about it. It's just super slick. Now, 154 CM has a lot more bite, right? And they're basically the same steel. CPM 154 is just a powdered version of 154 CM. But because of the grain structure, it's just a lot more finer grained, and it, for whatever reason, it just doesn't take a lot of bite when you sharpen it. Now, it really coarse grits, yeah, but it just seems like even at a low grit, it's slicker than most knives at that grit. Now, 154 CM can do the same thing at very high grits, but it's still, you know, has a lot more bite than CPM 154. I personally like my 154 CM right around 600 grit, and I'll put the angle that I want according to the geometry of the blade. The geometry of the blade meaning how thick the spine is relative to the thickness of the edge and the taper of which it takes to get down to the edge. You know, basically how thin or thick it is passing through materials between the spine and the edge, and that taper, you know, from it dropping down to the edge. Now, like I said though, you know, lowering the angle at lower angles, you can increase the bite sometimes, you know, or usually. High angle, low angle. High angle, low angle. Now, that's not saying that, how can I say this? Thicker edges can seem to have a lot more bite when they're thick behind the edge and you lower the angle, because the teeth of the edge are larger than, say, something that's super thin behind the edge. You know, it's just the teeth, you know, like a saw blade. Because at the edge, the edge of your knife is like a saw blade. Let me move these so I can kind of show you. And the bite you are getting are the teeth. Each one of those little, each one of the lines on the edge, that grit pattern, is little microscopic teeth, just like a saw blade. Now, even a polish has that as well. Like this one is a mirror polish, but if we really look at it, especially under like a microscope, you can see it still has lines. It still has a grip pattern. Now, you can polish that all the way out, and sometimes, you know, when you're polishing it completely out where you can't see any lines, there's still lines. You know, if you get it to the point to where you can't see any grit at all, if you look at it under a jeweler's loop or something like that, you'll see them. They're still there. They're just finer. Now, in a lot of cases, the finer they do get, the less aggressive it can feel. But, you know, with certain steels, though, you can really have a high amount of bite, even with a really, really good polish. You know, but you do want to make sure that you're not polishing them completely out, and you want to make sure you deburr really well, you have the right angle. Now, some steels, you know, especially when they're heat treated correctly, because heat treat is going to have a lot to do with it. And I have made a video on what steels take the best edges, but I'll be honest, if I redid that video again today, there are a few steels I would change my opinion on now that I've dealt with that steel so many times. You know, hundreds and hundreds of times at this point. So I've changed my opinion on some of the steels from that video. Maybe I should redo that one. If you guys would like to see that, let me know down in the comments. Now, certain steels, depending on the heat treat, have the ability to have, or should be, I should say, you should keep around a medium grit or lower, right? You know, the higher up in grit you get, it gets to a certain point, and that's where their most amount of bite is at, and if you go any higher, it's going to start dropping. And then some steels, you get to a certain point and they don't drop off. They just continue to have the same amount of bite, or maybe a more refined bite, but it still holds that amount of bite. And then some steels, let's say D2 tool steel, right? Some steels take a good amount of bite, even with, like, say, a higher grit. However, they lose it incredibly fast when you start cutting with it. Like, the teeth almost get knocked off, or it doesn't hold that bite when you start using it. So you might get bite initially after sharpening, but you will quickly lose it once you start cutting, especially through abrasive materials like cardboard. D2 is a steel that does that, and some D2 can also be, like I said before, where it starts dropping, you know, after like 1,000 grit, 800 grit, it starts dramatically dropping the amount of bite. But if it does hold on to it, you start using it and it'll quickly get slick. S35VN, that's another steel that does that. S35VN. Now it has the potential to hold on to the bite for a polish, but when you start using it, it can quickly get slick. And sometimes it doesn't even, you don't even have the ability to get up that high because it starts dropping in its bite once you get past a certain grit. Now, some steels like, what's another one? Maximate, right? Maximate has a very short span of a fine edge, and the bite that you feel from your edge, that's that's the fine edge, the edge that like shape, you know, it's when you touch it, it basically snags your skin because the teeth are very aggressive at the edge. Like Maximate, it has a working edge that lasts forever, like so long, not literally forever, but for a very, very long time. It has incredible edge retention, so it will continue to cut for a long time. However, if you have a very high grit on it, it will rapidly, and it takes an incredible polished edge. I mean, an insanely sharp polished edge. But when you start using it, it quickly goes down to a working edge. But then the working edge, it hangs on to for a very long time. But that's why if you want the most potential out of that steel for its longest lasting bite from the edge, where it's, you know, feels very aggressive for a very long time, then you want it with a coarse to medium grit edge. If you go higher, you know, like to a polish or something like that, that's when you start getting those negative effects for use. Now, these are subjects I talk about a lot in my lives. I do have a live tonight. We do lives every Wednesday and Saturday at 7:30 p.m. And then I have a join membership for sharpening, and we do giveaways and stuff on there, but, you know, mostly sharpening related, where we talk all about this stuff every other Sunday. And there's different tiers. Now, really quick, I want to just talk about angles really fast, and then we'll get out of here. So, angles are very important to the steel you're sharpening or to your edge. So, the lower the angle, all right, so say this is a low angle. It's a really tough edge, not very acute. This would be a low angle. So, this would be a high angle. This would be a low angle. So the edge bevel is bigger. It's larger than this one. This is a small edge bevel. Kind of like we've seen on the Chevalier. It has a high angle. I'm not sure the angle, but it's probably 25 degrees or something. Then we have lower angles, which are more acute. Now these angles will have longer lasting edges, so your edge retention will go up. And with this kind of edge, it will go down. But, and this is edge retention. Now, this kind of edge will have low toughness. So this kind of edge will be less tough than this edge. So this will have, the toughness will go down. And this one, it will go up. Now, obvious, or maybe this isn't obvious, heat treat and steel matters here, though, because certain steels are tougher than other steels, and depending on the heat treat and the HRC. The higher the HRC, the harder the steel is, the lower it is, the softer it is. So depending on, like, say, certain steels take lower angles better than others because they have the ability to have good edge stability. And while others, when with a low angle, can get fragile and microchip and roll and things like that. So that's also a factor at play that you need to know about the steel that you're sharpening. While it might do all the things we talked about earlier, you might have a result depending on what you do with your knife, and you have to determine what you do with your knife, right? How hard you use it, how often you hit things, and, you know, maybe bump staples and things like that. You have to determine, do you want a long-lasting edge retention but low toughness? Or do you want a really tough edge that doesn't have a long-lasting edge and probably isn't as sharp? And is the steel I'm putting this type of edge on a good edge for that steel? And will it be appropriate? Will it be more fragile, you know, than maybe another steel if I put a low angle on it? Or will it be able to hold it very well? You know, like say 14C28M, a steel that I love very much, and it's a very affordable steel. 14C28N is a very tough steel. It's a stainless steel. It's very tough, and it does hold a great edge. Now, it's not as long-lasting of edge retention as, you know, say 20CV, you know, assuming that they're both heat-treated correctly, but because of all its other qualities, it has the ability for you to put low angles, and it has high levels of sharpness. It has ease of stroppability. You can strop it back really easily. And since it's so tough, you know, it does good in, you know, for tougher blades and things like that. Now, like I said, the edge retention isn't as incredible as, say, M390, right? With a high, you know, with a good heat treat. However, M390 isn't going to have as much toughness as 14C. But 14C is going to be a little bit easier to deal with, and it's easier for companies to heat treat. And we're getting off the rails now. Edge toughness is basically the ability to withstand smacking and hitting. You know, basically, if you took your edge and you hit something, does it have the ability to stay in form, basically, or to not deform? Now, edge stability is exactly how it sounds. It's an edge's ability to stay stable at different angles, or the ability to stay stable at low angles or, you know, acute angles without deforming. And wear resistant, which we're not going to get into, is its ability to withstand wear. Like, you know, like an edge when it's sharp. How much can it cut through abrasive stuff without wearing off? Like the tip of this. If this was the tip of the apex, how much cutting can this do before this starts wearing down and getting dull? Its stability would be without chipping or rolling, and toughness would be like if you smacked it against something, would it chip or deform, you know, during that? While this might be very tough, it's not going to be very sharp or acute. It's not going to have the ability to bite into materials as easily as this. But it'll have the ability to smack things and hit things a lot better than this. But anyways, my point is that, you know, having the right edge for the steel and the heat treat, and how can you determine the heat treat? That's a lot more difficult, and that's for a whole nother show to determine whether or not your steel has a good quality heat treat on it or not. You know, I could go into a whole other video about that, but we're going to end it here. I love you guys. Thank you guys for watching. Hopefully you guys show up to tonight's live show. Peace!